Okay, everyone, today we're going to have our last lecture in the series on the Roman Empire, and today we're talking about the fall of the Roman Empire. So it's just the one slide, but there's a lot of stuff on it. So there is no one reason that the Roman Empire fell. It was a lot of reasons that, when working together, caused the empire to collapse. So to start with, political violence. So we're talking overthrowing of emperors. You did your Caesar assignment. Hopefully you figured out most of them were not very good people. And that's just at the beginning of Rome. The longer it goes on, the worse the rulers get. And in order to become emperor, it wasn't always an inherited position. It wasn't an elected position. You could become emperor by killing the last emperor. It gets so bad, there's a period of 50 years when there are 30 different emperors. Some ruling several years, others ruling a few weeks. So when you can't rely on who your leader is going to be from one day to the next, that causes people to lose faith in their government. The next issue is taxes. We all know that no one likes taxes, but they're necessary to pay for things like the upkeep of the empire. And they started having higher and higher taxes for a lot of different reasons. They reached a point where the empire was no longer expanding. So instead of conquering places and getting new goods and materials to supplement their economy, they needed to raise taxes to get more money in. They expanded so big that they needed a lot of money to maintain the empire. Remember, a big highlight of Rome was their great road systems for traveling, everything they needed, the communication, their goods, as well as their military. In order to maintain that, you need a lot of money. The larger your empire is, the more roads you have. And if those aren't maintained, you risk losing the areas that are further away. You also have a big rise in slavery, which leads to also a rise in unemployment in Roman citizens. So you need more taxes to pay for social programs so that not everyone is homeless. Okay. I believe Mr. Formosi talked to you about the big, terrible tax cycle they had. Basically, the Roman citizens would get so upset about how high their taxes were that they would be threatening to riot. Instead of dealing with the issue, many emperors would put on a show, go back to the entertainment that made them famous. So they might do a really big parade, but in order to pay for the parade, they had to use money from their funds. They didn't have the money. They'd have to raise taxes, which would make everyone upset, so they would throw a big parade. But then they had to pay for the parade, so they would raise taxes, which would make everyone upset. So they would throw a parade, and it goes on and on. To the point where you had no idea why there was a parade happening. It was just happening. And it was a distraction from miserable days, so people were happy to watch it. But it did nothing to help with the economy. Another factor that doesn't get talked about as much, but it really should, because remember, when it comes down to civilization, the first thing you need is enough food for the people. They have a big issue of overcultivation. So remember, we talked about how you need to plant different crops so that your soil stays healthy. Rome stopped doing that. They started to overproduce the crops that people liked, signature crops, olives, wheat, and grapes. And what will happen is, because they only focus on those, the soil is not being able to be replenished. So over time, even those big crops don't produce as much. So you see all this land, kind of what used to be these great fertile plains, becoming less and less valuable. So we have a government where we don't trust who the leader might be tomorrow. We have a government that keeps taxing and taxing, and now they're not even providing enough food. So the government was in trouble. The empire was weakening. There were several emperors who did try to help. Sometimes their efforts wound up worse than they expected. The two we'll talk about are Emperor Diocletian and Emperor Constantine. So Diocletian divides the empire. Both start with a D. Diocletian, divide, makes it easy. He's the one who's going to say the empire is too big, which it was. So what we're going to do is we're going to divide it. We'll have the Western Roman Empire and the Eastern Roman Empire. Which, if you remember from Alexander the Great, what happens when you divide an empire? It falls. He's going to try and fix prices, which is when you say you can't charge this much for an item because no one else has it, which we're dealing with in some cases right now, and try to regulate trade, which was very good. He also tried to institute the caste system, which you remember from India, where everyone has a role in a job, to again help with employment, which was also beneficial, but it also creates several levels of inequality within the system. His divided empire is going to flourish in the East. The Eastern Empire will continue for many years after, well into the 1100s with the Byzantine Empire. The Western Empire, when we talk about the fall of Rome, that's what we're talking about, the West, the real Italy part of it. He'll be followed by Emperor Constantine, and he's going to deal with the rising faction of Christians in Rome and throughout the empire, and he is actually going to start arguing that you need to tolerate Christians. You can't go around killing them and feeding them to lions in the gladiator cages or crucifying them. In an effort to bring peace to the empire, which was a good effort, but you will see then the Christian religion really taking off in this concept that you should be focused on God and the church, not your empire. And you do have several emperors who are still claiming to be gods. You don't connect with your government anymore. He's also famous for taking the capital city at the very edge of the Roman Empire and making it Constantinople, which still exists today as a city, but it is now called Istanbul. I've given you the link to the very fun song. I'm sure in all your free time you can feel free to make a little TikTok with, I think this is the They Might Be Giants version of Istanbul, not Constantinople. But fun. It's a fun song. So you have people not trusting their government because they don't trust the rulers. The taxes are too high. There's not enough food. Your emperors are trying sometimes to make things good, but it's winding up creating new things to believe in and divisions within the empire itself. And you just have the empire becoming very weak. And what happens when you have internal decay, meaning you're breaking down from the inside, that's when you get invaders. And there will be a lot who invade the Roman Empire. You'll have the Huns from Central Asia. You'll have the Visigoths, Vandals, and Ostrogoths, who are all different Germanic tribes, but all wanted to attack Rome. All of these were areas that Rome had invaded previously, so they were just coming back. I don't have it listed on the side, but they did have Vikings. And they're basically going to get attacked by everyone. Very famously, Attila the Hun, one of the great conquerors, will come in 434 CE. And you'll see many come in and fight. It was also an issue because of the military had broken down so much at that point that for a long time they were actually hiring people that weren't Romans. So you had huge sections of your military that were made up of Germanic tribes. One of my favorite stories was from a Gaul invasion, which is today it's like where France and Germany is. And one of the leaders who was Germanic from where he was born, but he had become a Roman citizen and he was a general in it. He went to go fight, and it turns out that the guy he was going to fight against, the Germanic leader, was his brother. And there's this whole scene where they're standing across from a river yelling insults at each other about their mother, like, mom always liked me best, and whatnot. It was actually pretty funny. And sad, I guess, when you think about it. But that's what the Roman military had become. It was no longer Roman. What is considered the real end, like we like to have a how do we close the book and say the end, is the 476 CE invasion by Odoacer. I believe he was an Ostrogoth. He marched in with his military, and he just took over Rome. He removed the emperor, who was considered the last true emperor of Rome. And it's interesting because his name, his Roman emperor name, was Augustus Romulus, which I just thought was interesting because, Romulus Augustus was his name, because you have Romulus, the founder of Rome, and then Augustus, the founder of the Roman Empire, becomes the last Roman to hold the Roman Empire. So that's considered the fall of Rome. That doesn't mean Rome doesn't exist anymore, but it does mean the empire doesn't exist. It cuts off all ties with everyone, and that's where you get that Dark Ages concept, where you were once part of this great empire, and now there's no protection, and nothing happens. Odoacer himself will only stay leader for like a year, and then he'll say, then I'm done, and then just leave and go home, and there's no one who can recover from that. Like I said, the Eastern Roman Empire will do fine and they'll continue on, but in terms of the West, it was done. It was the end of the empire. All right, so normally what we would do with this is we would end and then we would do a DBQ, but I'm not doing that with you. I'm going to modify it. You're going to go onto the Fall of Rome DBQ citation practice. I'm giving you a copy of the actual DBQ as you would get. All I want you to do is for the documents that I tell you, you're going to pick what you would have used as a quote or used as a paraphrase. One of them's a map, so you would just be explaining the map. And then you're going to put what you would use for your internal citations. Remember that author date or topic date or no date. You're going to practice that. You are not going to write the full DBQ. You are going to have a shorter writing next class that goes along with it, but I want you to do this practice first. If you have any questions while you're working on it, put it up on the class questions page, and then I'll get to it, or maybe another student will get to it before me. But that's it for today. Please make sure you do your exit slip, and I'll see you next class.